Hey, Kelsey.
Hey, Brooke.
Want to tell everyone what's happening in today's episode?
In this episode, we are going to talk about feminist pedagogy.
Okay.
How to teach.
Oh.
And then we are going to talk about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire.
Ooh, I actually know about this one.
All right, let's get into it.
Whoop, whoop.
Hello, and welcome to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%, the podcast that explores what happened to the women in history class. Now, here's your host, Kelsey Brooke Eckert, and her partner in crime, Brooke Neva Sullivan.
Episode 19, Feminist Pedagogy and the Triangle Fire.
Okay.
Okay. An alternate title is Circles and Triangles.
I mean, it's very clever.
Okay, but it would require you understanding what feminist pedagogy is, so we'll get to that.
Yeah, all right.
Okay.
Explain circles.
Well, first I have to ask you, Thanksgiving, good?
Yeah, no, it was really relaxing. Very easy, no pressure. I'm used to like driving around usually and being in the car with two kiddos and making the trek to Connecticut for 4 hours, but we just hung home. I made my very first turkey.
Yeah. You made a turkey?
I did.
I'm very impressed.
It was a women's holiday,
Yeah.
so I had to,
You went big.
I did. I brined it. I pulled the gross things out from the inside.
On your own?
I did.
With your hands?
Yup, it was super gross.
Okay.
I gagged a lot. But I did it. And then I basted that boy with some butter and herbs.
You're a butter boy baster.
Yep, nailed it.
Nailed
And it was a very juicy bird, so.
So how long did you wait before you put up your Christmas celebration?
We just did it today, so what are we, like 3 days out from
3
Thanksgiving?
days, and
Yeah.
you're in.
We usually do it this time
Yeah.
of year. Like
I usually
we're pretty
wait
quick
another
after.
week because I'm a Grinch, but
Oh, boo.
I didn't. This
I
year.
love.
went
I'm like
all out.
addicted to twinkle lights.
Twinkle
So
lights.
I want all the twinkle lights all the time.
Yeah.
Sully has to like really force me to take them down when Christmas is over.
Oh my gosh.
He's like, it's time. It's time. I'm like, no.
Time to move on.
They make me so happy.
I, as a nerdy historian, am very into anything like vintage. From
Yeah.
Art Deco.
Okay.
So
I like that.
Yeah. So we've got some. I don't know. Nothing extra special, but we've got like
What's
kind
like?
of rustic looking items on our tree.
Oh, like
And like
very,
knitted stockings, you know.
how very Puritan of you.
Yes, I try.
I know. I go very Scandinavian. I'm like I want the original Klaus, like the original Santa stuff, like
Yes.
from like the Norwegian world and like
Yes.
Sweden, and I want all those things. I don't know. And then like of course I have the cool thing when my all of our cousins get married, my grandmother would send you a box of Christmas ornaments from her tree,
Oh,
which I thought was a really nice tradition. And then when I got married,
sure she has tons too. You acquire them.
well, she would give you like 5 or 6. It wasn't
Yeah.
like this huge box of ornaments, but those are so precious to me now that I have the one that she got the first year they were married,
Oh,
and it hangs on our tree.
yeah.
And so it's the first year we got married, I hung it on our tree, which was really cool. So it always makes me like super weepy when
Yeah.
we hang our tree up. But
Yeah.
it's also, I forget I have it, and it always surprises me every year I open the
You're like,
Christmas.
oh yeah, I have this thing.
Yeah, and it's so awesome because I don't have a ton of stuff from my grandmother, but it's a really nice little tradition. And you can tell it's super old. It has like these cute little turtle doves.
Yeah.
It's very sweet. Yeah.
I'm enjoying making our own traditions in our family. Like,
Yeah.
You know, because it's all new, and our son's, you know, young, so it's sort of this new thing. And I learned a valuable lesson as a new mom. I got out the ornaments, and you know, they're like fragile. And my son picked one up that looked like a ball.
And just chucked
And
it.
promptly chucked it across the room. And I was like, okay, well, learned that those break next.
Yeah. I know. It was tough. Like last year, Luke was just starting to walk, crawl, run. And so we really didn't hang anything low on the tree. And this year he like really understands that he can touch the tree, but he got really frustrated because he couldn't hang anything. Like, nothing was hanging for him. So he just started chucking ornaments at the tree. And I was like, we're just patients. Like, we're just figure this out.
Yeah.
So, and then it was really cute. Like, his older brother, Nolan, was just, like, teaching him how to hang things, which was super sweet.
Yeah.
He's like, no, look, Luke, you just...
This is how we do it.
Yeah, just take your time.
Yeah.
It was just, like, the sweetest little moment. I was like, oh, all right, I like this. This will be cute.
Oh, my gosh.
But Luke has zero patience in his little 2-year-old body.
Yeah.
He just shucks the ornaments.
Shucks them. That's awesome.
That's good.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about school because I'm headed back to school.
I know. So you were remote, right?
We were remote for a couple weeks, and so we're back in person. And I've been thinking a lot about this theory about feminist pedagogy. So pedagogy is basically like the science or art of teaching.
Okay.
And so like all the skills that come along with that,
Yeah.
like scaffolding and
Like all the nuances.
all the nuances of this field. And we don't need to get into, teacher education to discuss this. And I think it's something that many people can appreciate. And I was actually thinking that you might be interested in this theory in a business perspective, because I imagine there are lots of things that people in business are doing that are very similar to
Possibly.
what we're talking about. So.
But, Kelsey, I'm always interested in what you have to talk about, whether it applies to my life or not.
Okay. So, I'm kind of an old school teacher, and despite the fact that I am like the content that I bring in is kind of new school, I think that the way that I teach is still very like direct instruction-y, and it has been my...
Is that a term?
Direct instruction. Well, direct instruction is like me, teacher, telling you student information.
Like very lecture based.
Yeah. And history like lends itself to that.
I mean,
really
big time.
well.
It's such a good storytelling opportunity.
Yeah, and that's also how I justify it to myself. But it's really not current practice, and I'm really bad at it. And I was fortunate to work with a colleague who modeled for me how to get out of that habit. And part of it for me is that's how I learned.
Yeah.
Right? I liked presenting in school and college, and so like that it's just sort of like plays to my strengths, and I feel good about it. I think I've gotten a lot of positive reinforcement from students and adults in the room alike that say like, wow, this really worked, like you're really good at that, and that's kind, but I know that it's something that I need to sort of like get away from.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely teachers that probably sway on the opposite end of that and lean on the tips and tricks and tools and paper and all of the little, kind of added learning tools versus being a lecturer that maybe they're not as comfortable in that space.
Yeah. So I try to break my course up my classes up into thirds. So students do some sort of activity to like get them warmed up to class. There's like the middle third is some sort of direct instruction, and then the final third is some sort of investigation or inquiry.
How long are your classes typically?
45 minutes, so like 15.
That's a long time.
It feels really fast. Especially when you break it up into thirds, it's like boom, like
oh yeah, and you're like running
flying
into the next thing.
Yeah.
Do you, as a teacher, like know what like things that you want to spend more energy on that could take a little longer that you have you build in the space if you need it?
Totally. And so we'll get into I also am a big proponent of project-based learning, and so we'll break class for a week and be working on something.
Okay.
So that whole like thirds model is sort of like a typical class, but we might be in a project, we might be doing something else. So the problem with so I had a realization that I might be sexist, and
that was so loaded. What?
I know. So I give an award. My school does an awards thing every
Wait,
spring.
sexist towards what sex?
Women.
Oh.
Yeah, so bear with me. So we do this
This is,
awards
like,
thing
alarming.
every spring, and I give an award for critical thinking in history class. And the award goes to a person from each of my history classes that stood out in their engagement in class. They're asking questions of being like, wait,
Yeah.
what? Right? That kid. The one who, like, talks, who debates, who is willing to, like, push me and be like, I don't know if I agree with that.
Okay.
Like,
all right.
Yes, good. Let's talk about that. The kid who shines in debates.
AKA your favorite students.
AKA the kid. They might not be. I mean, I gave it 1 year to this kid who drove me nuts all year because he argued with me every day, you know. But
he was
like,
engaged.
He was engaged, and I was like, great. Like, fine. So one thing that I realized, though, so I've been teaching for, almost a decade. I've given that award to 2 girls.
Whoa.
And I give it to 3 kids a year. And so, that's a lot of boys that I have recognized for their
the students
time.
know about this award when you start your course?
I don't think kids are very aware of them. Like, I don't think they realize that it's the same, award year to year.
So something, you can cut this out later if you want to, but something I learned in business is if you don't show someone the goal, it's very hard to get toward. So you almost have to, I'm thinking about how you can challenge yourself to find more women to give this award to, is if you say at the beginning, I'm looking for the girls to speak louder.
Yeah.
And just say it out there. Like, this is what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And this is the behavior I'm looking to model. And the reason I want to see that is this.
Yeah.
Not only for this award, but in life.
Yeah.
I am going to challenge you to be a participant.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is by showing these behaviors.
Well, so there's so much to what you're talking about, and I really like the idea of, like, goal setting.
Just, like, call it out from day one.
Call it out. This is what we need. And I do have, we have a discussion rubric in my class that basically outlines exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But the girls do speak up when it is a graded moment in class. And the other thing that's dawning on me as I think about my experience with this award, but also with lots of girls in class, is that I have had some of the smartest kids to come out of this community in my classroom. I've had many female valedictorians in my classroom, and yet they don't get the award. Why are these brilliant women in my class not getting this recognition?
Yeah.
Because the answer is they're not speaking up, they're not outwardly engaging in class. And then I thought about myself as a student, and I said, I love this subject. If I was in this classroom, would I get this award? Would I get this recognition?
Would you debate?
Would I debate? Would
you
chime
challenge?
in?
Yeah.
Would I just ask questions? Would I know enough to ask about things going on in this general field or topic to ask questions? And I think the answer is a resounding no.
Really?
Yeah. And so at least maybe now I would, but not when I was 16.
Oh. Well, maybe as you know me now, I'm relatively similar to how I was in high school, but I asked all the questions. I was the engaged debater. I would challenge an educator. I often would win those ridiculous awards that meant nothing, but it was because I was fearless to fail.
Right.
And I think that, a large number of my friends growing up and women that I know have a real hard time failing.
I think so. My first thought was like, are girls not confident enough, right, to speak up? And so I turned to the literature, and confidence is something that both men and women struggle with. So it's not.
Yes. Yep.
And so what is?
And that comes with age.
Yeah. And so I was thinking back to all the studies that I know that I've learned about how people behave in classrooms, and we know that women and marginalized people who have been marginalized do not speak up in class, do not perform well when there's really no reason why they shouldn't. One really famous study, they had a mixed group of boys and girls take a math test.
Okay.
In the control room, they were just given the math test. In the test group, when the teacher distributed the math test, the teacher said, hey guys, I want everybody to work really hard on this. They have found that there is no difference between how boys and girls perform on this assessment. That's all. Just a little introduction from the teacher. And in that room, in the test room, the girls actually performed better than in the room where the teacher said nothing. And so what did they learn? They learned that stigmas from outside of the classroom come in. And unless we in the classroom address those things,
Okay.
nothing, like the girls will perform, in that case, the girls will perform worse. They've done similar studies with like African American students and
Yeah.
and
Any
found-
marginalized group.
Right. So there is in our society a dominance hierarchy. And it's, kind of the typical like white male at the top, right? And
I'm shocked, Kelsey.
right. And so in this dominance hierarchy, and men and women have their own dominance hierarchies, right? But also there's sort of like the overarching one. And in these hierarchies, men are conditioned to compete with one another for sort of that like alpha position.
Okay.
And in that competition, the power and the prestige and respect that they want is to be seen as that man who stands up, speaks up, is sort of like a dominant
Gregarious and
presence
yeah.
in the room.
Okay.
But for women to dominate in the female dominance hierarchy, women are competing to be more agreeable. That is like the sort of like feminine hallmark of like think about all the conditioning. Like this is bringing in a little bit of psychology here.
Sure,
but
yeah.
On playgrounds, when you see a boy, this is like the classic like gender studies like
Okay.
thing. You see a boy off on his own on a playground. He's industrious, he's adventurous, look at him go. You see a girl alone on a playground. Why doesn't she have any friends? What's wrong with her? And
Yeah, like that she can't be fine by herself.
right. I mean, I'm not saying that this is correct, but there's something in our social structure that says women need to be interconnected, they need to be agreeable, they need to be pleasant. And this is where the B word comes in, right?
Yeah.
Like if she's not these things, when she's feisty, she's, she's a bitch. And
Oh, I thought the B word was boss.
oh,
Because that's all I ever wanted to be.
yeah. But I think you are so not this person, and that you have
No, but I
worked to
can
challenge-
absolutely see that. But those outside forces that you were talking about from that study,
Yeah.
you also have to take into account location, situation,
Yep.
how you're raised, what your household is like. All those things come into play in that circumstance.
And the two girls who got the award from me, I was thinking about them a lot today. One of them, her mom is the most outspoken person I've ever met in my entire life. And I love this girl's mom, and the fact that she comes in and is just a powerhouse in the classroom. It's not like her out of nowhere. She comes from a family that values that.
Yep.
And
And
so
encourages it and
it,
fosters
and
it, yeah.
They probably argue at the dinner table and, in a kind of intellectual way.
Right,
and,
yeah.
And so, yeah, you're totally right. Like, different people might defy those cultural norms based on, family norms.
Yeah.
But women are really conditioned to be agreeable. And when you, as a woman, speak up, you are threatening your agreeableness. And how many women do you know who, when they speak up, like, I think of some of our friends at book club, they leave book club and they second guess everything that they said in book club. And, I wonder if they took it this way. And
Well, there's also this thing in large organizations, when you're in a conference room and you're all meeting and, different women will preface what they say before they say it.
Yeah.
Versus just making a statement.
Yeah.
So they'll say, and they'll ask if they can speak.
Yeah.
Can I just say something?
Let me raise my hand.
Can I talk? Can
Yep.
I make a point?
Yep.
And it's like, why are you asking for permission to speak in a room where you're equal to all of your peers?
Right.
And men do not. They're like, they just kind of come out and say what they have. And then women will also do this thing where they say, I think, or I feel. And then again, and you're prefacing what your statement is going to be versus just owning it.
Just owning it.
And so there's these ways that these things show up and to challenge
And
those.
the I'm sorry pandemic that we're
Oh gosh, yeah. Thankfully that one I feel like is dissipating, but it also is, it's awareness that these are norms that have been kind of ingrained in you forever and ever, and like you're saying, those dominants, the triangle of hierarchy, those are some ways that you give up your power.
Right.
By doing those small things in context.
But why? I mean, why do I say I'm sorry? Why do I say I feel, I think, I da-da-da? Because I exist in this world. I exist in this society where people measure me first by how agreeable I am, second by whatever my idea is. Whereas for men in this same structure and same society, it's first by how confident you appear.
Right.
Second by your ideas, right? And it's like this posturing, that men do, and women do it too. It's just a totally different form of posturing.
Right.
In my experience, I feel like, and I would love to keep data on this, but I feel like when I act feminine, I get my way more than when I come in and just say what I think. And I don't know, I don't have the data to back that, but that feels correct.
Well, if it feels correct, you're probably right. And in your experience, your own experience, so you're going to own what you have been through. But I do think that there is something to wanting to be liked. Mm-hmm. And
teachers are probably...
Oh, gosh. I would imagine that you guys are at the top of that pyramid of... You just want to be liked. It's I don't necessarily need
Are you psychoanalyzing me now?
I'm just thinking,
okay.
I don't need to be liked to get my job done, but it certainly gets my job done easier if I am well liked.
Yeah.
So how can I build a bridge with someone through friendship and relationship and do all the ships?
Right.
But you don't have to necessarily all the time. I wonder if it's different for male educators than it is for female educators.
Definitely. And there are so, you could talk about classroom management, and how men and women navigate that differently.
I've talked to my husband about this, and he definitely has brought up those topics before of how different the women are in his school in particular, of how they manage and how they steer a classroom. Mm-hmm. And it's just completely different. His presence, he's a gym teacher, he's loud. So he immediately will walk into the room and the kids are excited because it's playtime. But then immediately he's very effective of just being super loud and has a presence. And it's if a female gym teacher were to do the same, I wonder if it would have the same reaction.
Yeah. I remember one of my mentor teachers was 6'2" and big.
Yeah.
And he, I taught a lesson in front of his class one time, and he said, it's really great. We got to work on classroom management, and I have nothing to contribute to tell you how to do it, because when I walk in a room, people just go silent. And I was like, okay. So I had to work on my own to figure out how to do that. So I think, though, that this gets to, there are these structures, these hierarchies into how we behave that have nothing to do, like here I am, a teacher saying, please speak up in my class. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions. And yet only a few, and usually boys, do that in my classroom. Mm. And so how do we change the dynamic of the classroom to get them to understand that I want to hear it, other than saying it, right? Other than saying and begging them to speak up and engage
it's that,
with me.
But then it's also, thinking about how do you get the student who is loud to be a listener.
Be a listener, right? How do you get that boy to understand?
Or how do you get them to know cues of how to include someone's thoughts or encourage them to continue down a path? You know, that's the other thing, is that you can be a cheerleader really easily if you're loud. And that's something that I've learned over my lifetime, is I don't need to be the loudest person in the room. But I can certainly amplify someone else's voice.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly like, oh, this person, and I'll say their name and bring them in. I'm like, they gave me this idea the other day, and this person talked about this. And, you know, how do I bring their voices in so that they're still heard even though they're not speaking?
Yeah.
And there's opportunity to do that in a classroom with that loud student too.
Totally. So there's a lot of research into how you seat kids and get them in circles, get them looking at each other rather than looking at me, and creating
or
this,
like the backs of each other's heads.
Yeah, ping pong situation where like everyone's facing the teacher, so teacher speaks, kids respond, and you know it goes back.
You
and
always
forth.
knew you had a fun teacher when you sat in a circle. You're like,
Yes,
yes.
this is gonna be good, right? And COVID's totally messing with all.
Oh, I know,
seating
that does
arrangements
suck.
and whatever, but. The other theory is doing a Socratic seminar. And this is how my colleague down the hall taught all the time. And she was younger than me. I was like her mentor teacher, and I would go in her room and just watch. And I love that because she had mastered something that I really needed to work on.
Okay.
So
talk to people about the Socratic method and what that is.
Socrates, you know, he was ancient Greece philosopher. His idea was that you get your students to ask questions. And so I ask a question like, Brooke, what would be the best way to get kids to engage? And you respond by asking me a question back. Well, you know, what's
the average age of your students?
Right. And
what are the genders in your classroom?
And then I say, and the whole idea is that these questions are building on each other so that we are getting to something more meaningful by the asking of questions. And so Socrates, it cracks me up because I'm like, hey, do this idea. Socrates in his time was prosecuted for his teaching methods.
Right.
And he was basically given a choice, which is to like renounce how he taught or to die. And he chose death. And I'm like, okay. So anyway, so do that. Choose death. No.
Back it up.
Okay. Anyway, so feminism. So the reason this has sort of become a feminist thing, and remember, feminism is about way more than gender and way more than women's rights.
Right.
It's about like the dismantling and emboldening of all sorts of people and trying to help like men and women navigate,
have better relationships and better conversations. Yeah.
So we're asking questions. And by asking questions, we're getting to good things. And so the teachers have now taken this idea and really structured it in a really awesome way. So we have all these inquiries up on our website, and people can go in and lesson plans, inquiries.
Yep.
I call them inquiries because they're questions, right? Let's investigate this question together. And you can sit the students in a circle, and the teacher, my new mantra is, I am succeeding if I am not talking.
Right.
If the kids are talking, and there's this phrase like, never say something in a classroom that a student could say, and I love that. And so anytime I realize a kid knows something, I'm like, hey, you want to introduce this topic to everybody?
I love that.
So, get the kids to say it rather than me. And I can fill in the blanks if they've left something out.
Right.
So, but I'm succeeding if I say nothing. So you get the kids in a circle. They have the documents, the historical, information in front of them. They might have had some time to look at those things before. And you have them investigate in a discussion these documents. And so I've always said, okay, I can do that. And then I put the kids in a circle, and the same 3 kids who always talk. And so my colleague down the hall figured out this ingenious way to get everybody to talk.
I'm like edge of my seat.
So she gave everybody a cup, and she gave everybody tokens. And the tokens represented how many times she wanted them to speak during this discussion, during this seminar. And so in front of you, in front of me, and everybody else in the discussion is a cup with tokens. And when you make a substantive contribution to the discussion, you move one of your tokens into the cup.
Okay.
You know, and everybody else around you knows, I have spoken, right? And depending on how long you have, you could have more or less tokens.
Right.
I did one of these over Zoom with students the other day, and I didn't have time in the Zoom that I had for everybody to contribute multiple times. And so I said one token to move in.
Yeah.
And you could make the tokens something fun or quirky, and it could be anything.
Yeah.
And if you make a substantive contribution, but you're not confident enough to move the token yourself, I, the teacher, can walk over silently and move the token for you, right? To reinforce, that was awesome. Good job. Here's your token moved.
So clever.
And what my colleague did was she just walked the whole class. She's on the outskirts.
Yep.
Silently moving tokens for kids. And then the other thing is, once you get all your tokens into the cup,
you kind of just hang back.
Listen.
Yeah.
Listen. Remind everybody that so-and-so had a really cool idea. Get them to come in. And so those talkers, they still get their time. They can get those 5 tokens.
Oh, yeah. And they're feeling good.
They're feeling good. And then they go, shoot, I said all of my ideas in the first 3 minutes.
Crap.
And they're not cut off. They can keep contributing. But now they are very conscious of the fact that they're done and everybody else still has stuff to say. And as a facilitator of these, sometimes I will chime in when I know that 3 kids still haven't spoken yet.
Yeah.
And so I'll say, okay, this would be a really good time to chime in. And it makes everyone conscious of how much they're contributing and how much they're actually listening to one another.
I love it.
And I don't know if that translates well to a business meeting.
It's so funny. I
but...
have been doing this training with some of our new hires for this one area in our business, and it's been really fun. It's how you show up. It's how you become a trusted advisor. And so the training is all about how you make introductions to yourself and others, and how you build a team through connection and blah blah blah. It's really fun. So, anyways. Last week, they had to present their introduction, and I did a roulette wheel. I was at random picking people because I was like, no, everyone's going to go, but I didn't want the most confident people to go first, so I told them that there was a roulette wheel that I was spinning, but I actually just picked the less confident people to go first, so that they would go, versus kind of like hanging back and waiting for a volunteer, or letting the really outspoken, kind of louder, gregarious guys in the group, which oddly enough were mostly men that were like that, they went last. And they were great.
Yeah.
But they were the exclamation point on the conversation versus the lead. And I wanted the less confident people to go first so that they didn't hang back and feel that imposter syndrome or less confident, or that they didn't want to share, they wanted to readjust. It's like, nope, get it out of the way. You go. And I told them there was a wheel, but there wasn't.
Yeah.
But that's the nice thing of being virtual too. But it's just an interesting method to the madness. But I love this token idea.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a million other little tricks that one could use in a classroom to get people to speak up. One that I do a lot is, especially for my introductory activities, it's usually some sort of question that I pose to them as they walk into class that they need to respond to. That question, I always have them answer it in writing quietly before we talk about it.
Okay.
And the reason I do that is because if I pose a question to the group, usually, first of all, for an introductory activity, I'm not asking rocket science.
Yeah, no, you're trying to get a thought provoke.
It's usually, opinions or, ideas or recall this thing. And usually there's multiple answers to whatever it is I'm asking. And so if you just ask the question to the classroom, the loud kids speak up first, and everybody goes, yeah, what they said. And it's like, no. Like, first of all, there are multiple answers here. So that person is very smart, and they do engage, and they are loud. Good for them. But that's only, like, one of the answers.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, give me more. So I really love all of those things. And there are so many moves now to requiring 100% participation in class. And there's a million strategies to doing that. But I don't think people make the connection of this isn't just about checking in that all kids are learning. It's also about dismantling these hierarchies. And even if those things exist outside this room, that's fine. But we need people who listen. We also need people to speak up and to know that their contributions are valid and needed, and that their silence actually hurts the learning environment.
Absolutely. I love that, all those concepts and the ideas. I think, too, of like calling it out, yes, one, but teaching them what it looks like to be an active listener. Yeah. That's a skill that many adults still struggle with. Right. And we constantly are having to reiterate on how to say the same thing 10 times to get someone to say, like, Steve, you have to stop talking over Linda. She's trying to say something. It's like, please stop. Yeah. And if no one's going to say it, then it's going to continue to happen. And that's the other thing, too, is you can't just sit silently by when you see someone being steamrolled or someone not saying something. Right.
And the other thing here is, like, we've been talking about, well, why are women left out of history? And we've talked, one of the big answers that we've come back to a couple times is that women don't see themselves in this field, right? They don't learn about women, right. They don't see themselves, so they're not attracted to it. And therefore we have fewer women historians who are writing fewer books on women if they do write about women. And so it's cyclical, right? But there are women historians out there who write about men. Yep. Great. Do that. Keep doing that, because we need to revisit every topic that's been covered and think about those things. But this could also be a way.
To your theme, though, is that, ultimately women, to feel successful in society, had to be well liked. So they're not going to be these outrageous women all the time. It's going to be fewer and less than. Yeah. And it's finding them and highlighting them.
Yeah. But let's start in our class.
Yeah.
Find those girls. It's almost embarrassing that the 2 girls that got my award are the girls who defied the odds, said, F it, I'm speaking up. Boom, But, they actually, even though those girls are awesome, they don't represent all the girls in the room. Most girls in my classes are quiet.
But I also wonder what
am I doing to bring it out?
Yeah, exactly. But what are those male counterparts in those classrooms with those girls that you gave the awards to? Mm. Were there cheerleaders? Were there men that were also defying the dynamics and letting them, speak and say what they needed to say, or calling out and be like, what did Becky want to talk about?
One of these students in particular, I don't think she needed anybody to give her permission to speak. But you're right. I think that part of it is the dynamic. And so the teacher didn't change. So the students in the room must have changed and shifted something to create that space. Absolutely. Okay, Brooke, let's take a little break.
Breaks.
For lesson plan ideas and how to teach women's history, visit our website, www.remedialherstory.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Remedial Herstory. If you think what we're doing is needed, please consider joining our Patreon community. Patreon allows you to sponsor a podcast with a small donation. Patrons get access to bonus materials, extended episodes, insider information, and gear. Give at whatever level you can. Patrons who give at the $25 tier will receive a Remedial Herstory mug and a booklet of all the Remedial Herstory lesson plans and resources. This episode is sponsored by our patrons. Thank you to Kent and Jamie Heckel from Ohio, Sarah Reardon from New Hampshire, Leah Tanger from Connecticut, and Bridget Erlandson from Connecticut. You guys make this show possible. Welcome back, Brooke.
Oh, we're back.
We're back. So, we were talking about Socratic seminars.
Yes.
Circles, where you get the kids in a circle.
Oh, I'm with you now.
You get it? Now we're going to talk about triangles.
All right.
And rather, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. Have you heard of it?
I have.
Okay, when?
In a podcast I listened to, but I also learned about it in college. Or actually, no, not college, but a class I took after college.
Okay. So, I did not learn about this in high school, college, none of the above.
Okay.
I learned about it after I became a teacher and was doing research.
So, I mean, I think the big reason I have learned about it is it changed a lot of labor laws.
Yeah. So for your work.
Yeah. So, being in human resources, you kind of learn about the big moments. And this was definitely one of them.
This is a huge one. So I teach about it when I'm teaching about the Industrial Revolution and progressive reforms in the turn of the century. And I think that it 100% must be taught in secondary classrooms.
Yeah. It's a great topic to talk. It's a huge tragedy in American culture, but it also changed so much.
Yeah. I think of it kind of as like, if you're not teaching suffrage,
you're
not teaching history,
right?
And you're not teaching women's history. And so, like, if you don't teach this, not only are you not teaching about industrial history, you're not teaching women's history. And, like, what an amazing opportunity to teach women's history alongside your very normal curriculum, right? Very typical curriculum. So, what is this event? What do you remember about it?
I knew that it was a lot of women and like teenagers or young adults that were working in the factory at the time. And that the accident happened. That was a huge fire and a lot of people died. It was in New York, right?
Yeah. So, whoa!
Wrong tube.
Wrong tube. So, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was just one of many of the garment factories in New York City around the turn of the century.
Right.
These garment factories are competing for, prices, and but there are so many immigrants coming over, and this is so like when you're teaching about the Industrial Revolution, I really think that there are like three major causes of the Industrial Revolution.
Okay.
There's new technology. That's just sort of transforming the economy.
Yeah.
Think trains, think steel, think skyscrapers, elevators, electricity, like
it was age of an innovation.
It's like everything's blowing up. So technology, the government's policy is very hands-off. They call it laissez-faire economics, where the government is like letting businesses run wild, and as a result, they are forming these monopolies, and just things are taking off. The other big reason is there's a huge labor pool. 28 million immigrants come over to the United States in the post-Civil War period. And up to
28 million.
28 million. So basically,
and a lot of them came through Ellis Island.
Ellis Island, Angel Island in California.
Yep.
You're seeing a huge influx of immigrants that are very, quote unquote, different than the already here immigrants. Because we're all immigrants. And
the current immigrants.
The current immigrants. And so you've got this dynamic. And so this is a really dangerous dynamic, though. Like, even though it is and when I teach about the Industrial Revolution, when I teach about economics in general with my students, I help them understand that there are lots of measures of an economy. And so when we say,
you mean it's not just the stock market?
Right. So it's not just the stock market, but it's also like GDP, a measure, gross domestic product, a measure of the economy.
Okay.
And if you look at the Industrial Revolution, it's a boom, right? You can see that there is so much growth in those measures. But in terms of worker stress level, quality of life, happiness, like
They didn't care. There was no HR.
Right? Like, are those things also fruitful during this time? Are those things also booming? And maybe because you have a huge growth of the middle class, but you also have huge numbers of people living in poverty.
Right.
Monopolies lead to increased prices for consumers, and that's not good, and there's a lot of monopolies coming out of this time. It's not until Teddy Roosevelt that you see people like really trying to break up these monopolies and trusts. So the Triangle Shirtwaist is wrapped up in this laissez-faire capitalist system.
Right.
And the workers that work there are mostly immigrant people. Garment workers across the board tended to be women, although of course there are men that work there. And there are different jobs in these garment factories that men tended to do, whereas women tended to be the ones like doing the sewing and the cutting and the trimming of these shirtwaists. And a shirtwaist is like a button-up shirt that was fashionable in the time period. The working conditions in this factory were intolerable for a lot of the women. And I say that with a hint of questioning about the historical accuracy of that comment, because it is from the women themselves that we hear that it is intolerable. But obviously the employers do not think that it's intolerable, and because they continue on as usual. And so the women who work in the Triangle Factory in particular go on strike in 1909. And eventually this walkout expanded and it became this massive New York uprising where 20,000 women walk out of their garment factories. And
that's a lot.
Yeah. This is a massive women's movement, right?
That would cripple some businesses.
That would cripple businesses, absolutely. And this is, in my class, to put it in context, this is not the first time people have walked out. This is like right in step with all the labor movements that have gone on before this. I teach, all of those different things, and I kind of end with Triangle because, like you said, Triangle results in so much change. And so it's nice to contrast Triangle with some of those ones that came before. And I think the biggest difference is it's women that are doing this, right? Like, that is so interesting. So 20,000 women walk out of their garment factories demanding change, demanding unions. They want more money. They want to limit their work week to 52 hours, which, like, we live in a world where the 40-hour work week is like the norm.
The standard.
The standard, yeah. They want a better way of dealing with the unemployment that came from seasonal shifts in the industry.
Yeah.
And they want workplace safety. So I want to read a little bit from Clara Lemlich, who is considered sort of the woman who this is a women's movement. She is one of the leaders. Many, but she is a leader. And this was published in the New York Evening Journal in November of 1909. She says, "First, let me tell you something about the way we work and what we are paid. There are two kinds of work: regular, that is salary work, and piecework. The regular work pays about $6 a week, and the girls have to be at their machines at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they stay at them till 8 o'clock at night, with just a half-hour lunch in that time."
That's crazy.
That's craziness. 11-hour days with a half-an-hour lunch. The shops, well, there's just one row of machines that the daylight ever gets to. That is the front row nearest the window. The girls at the other rows of machines back in the shops have to work by gaslight by day as well as by night. Oh yes, the shops keep the work going at night too. The bosses in the shops are hardly what you would call educated men, and the girls to them are part of the machines that they are running. They yell at the girls and they call them down, even worse than I imagine the Negro slaves were in the South.
Whoa.
I bet that's an exaggeration.
Well, you know, one of the things I've read about a lot of these factories too are the sexual violence that happened with a lot of these women, which was horrifying.
Horrifying, yeah.
There were several murders during this time period from women that worked in these factories that were never solved. And it happened in multiple factories in similar areas. Like, there were serial killers at this time.
Oh my
it's
gosh.
crazy.
So, the shops are unsanitary. That's the word that is generally used, but they ought to be worse. They need to use a worse word, she says. Whatever we tear or damage, any of the goods we sew on, whatever is found damaged after we are through with it, whether we have done it or not, we are charged for the piece and sometimes for a whole yard of the material. At the beginning of every slow season, $2 is deducted from our salaries. We have never been able to find out what this is for. And so she goes on and on and on about the issues and calls for a general strike.
Sounds valid.
Sounds pretty valid. One thing that I think is really fascinating about their strike is that they get a lot, they're out for weeks and weeks. Can you imagine weeks and weeks without pay?
Especially if you didn't know it was coming. Like, it sounds like this is a yearly event that you could try to plan for if you knew it was coming, but no.
This is not a yearly event. This is a very big and sudden, I mean, not sudden, it's been building for a long time, but okay, you need to prepare and we are going on strike. And so weeks without work, these women are out. And lots of the factories eventually begin to agree to the demands and get the women back in and back to work. But Triangle does not. And so the women stay out and they march and they march. And what's really interesting about this particular strike is that it gets the attention of a lot of people that are wealthy.
Right.
The daughter of Vanderbilt, she's an heiress.
Yep.
She gets involved, which I thought was such a fascinating thing because we don't learn about a lot of really wealthy women in history class, right? You get the Henry Fords, you get the Vanderbilts, you get the Rockefellers, but you don't learn about the heiresses who are involved in these things, their business savvy, their charitable contributions, right? And what a cool way to bring in what is the Vanderbilt legacy? What's continuing on?
Her name's Cornelina Struzavant Vanderbilt.
So the challenge here, though, is like, are the working conditions in this factory actually as bad as the women are making it out to be? And the issue here is that, first of all these women walk out because across the board, this is just how that industry is run. Yeah. So, not compared to present day, but compared to its time, these were actually some very modern buildings that they were working in, and they were working with some of the best machines of the era. So as far as the standards, like, this is not sweatshop work for the era, which is hard. And the Smithsonian had an interesting article about it. They said it was a leader in the industry, not a rogue operation. It occupied 27,000 square feet on 3 floors and brightly lit, which completely contradicts what the woman just said. It's a 10-year-old building, so it's not old by any means.
That's brand new.
Brand new. It employs about 500 workers. Triangle had modern, well-maintained equipment, including hundreds of belt-driven sewing machines mounted on long tables that ran from floor-mounted shafts. So, right, like, this is, like, it sort of paints this picture of, like, a modern industry for the era. So that's kind of a tricky bit of this issue. So what happens? Well, the workers, they eventually get a little bit of a pay raise. But nothing changes in terms of working conditions, and eventually they're forced to end the strike and just come back and take the hit. So they come back to work.
That's discouraging.
It is very shortly after that they the big thing, the reason the strike is so important to this story is that everybody knows who these women are because they've been out on strike.
Yeah.
Oh, and I didn't even mention one really important detail. The owners of the Triangle Factory hired people to go out and roughhouse and like break up the strikers, beat them up. They sent prostitutes to like rile people up in the streets and make it very ruckus to A, deter the women from striking, but B, make them seem like they are a bunch of rabble-rousing crazies out in the street.
Weird. We can't relate that to anything happening nowadays.
Right, I know. Oh my gosh. So the women come back, and within a very brief amount of time, a cigarette butt is discarded on the factory floor, and it catches all the cotton and the dust. It catches fire. And the women occupy a number of floors. The bosses are on one of the top floors. Mm-hmm. The people on the bottom level, when the fire happens, they call to the top floor and tell the bosses. The two bosses slip out the window into the neighboring building and are able to get down from there. The women in the that are now working in the floors above where this fire breaks out don't get any notification that there is a fire burning on the floors below them until smoke starts creeping up through the floor. So, okay, think about what would happen in a normal fire in any building today. You would run to the stairs, right? There were stairs, but the door to the stairs was locked. Why was the door to the stairs locked? Well, because the bosses had been searching all the women, and they were afraid that these women were stealing things from them. They were also trying to prevent them from taking too many bathroom breaks. So they locked the fire exit. There's an elevator, but the elevator, there's a whole thing in a minute. I'll read some of the issues with the elevator. There's a fire escape out the building, so a bunch of women run out onto the fire escape. But the fire, there's very little, right, laissez-faire economics. There's very little government enforcement of fire code. And so you've got a whole bunch of women out on the fire escape, and it literally peels off the walls on the outside of the building and collapses under the weight of the women on the fire escape. And so a lot of women fall to their death on the fire escape. And so no stairs. There is an elevator, and it's going up and down very slowly, taking as many people as it can at a time. And the women are basically trapped on these top floors. It takes a while for the fire department to come. When the fire department arrives, their ladders don't reach to where some of the women are on the 8th and 9th floor. And so the women are stuck having to jump. They start holding out nets for the women, but the nets don't do anything, and the women still hit the ground and die.
Ugh.
And so whether it's in the fire escape, in the elevator, or jumping for their lives, women, we end up losing over 140 women in this factory fire, but women and men, but predominantly women. The youngest, keep in mind, child labor laws are very limited, and so there's lots of young ladies working in this factory and many garment factories, and the youngest victim of the fire was 14 years old.
Ugh.
Just to put that.
It's a child.
It's a child. 14 years old, burning. So the New York Times, there's a whole bunch, because this is such a major event, there are tons of primary sources available on the internet about these things. Cornell University pulled them all together in like a LibGuide, which is really nice. The New York Times on March 26, 1911, ran this story of just testimonies from eyewitnesses of the fire. According to several eyewitnesses, the flames were pouring from the windows and the girls jumping to the sidewalks for several minutes before the first fire truck with ladders arrived. Benjamin Levy, he says that it was all of 10 minutes after the fire started before the first fire engine arrived. Bodies were falling all around us, and 2 or 3 of the men with me were knocked down. The girls just leaped wildly out of the windows and turned over and over before reaching the sidewalk. I only saw one man jump. All the rest were girls. They stood in the windows, tearing their hair out in the handfuls, and then they jumped.
Ugh.
a machine, and then they go on in this article to talk about how the elevators mechanics weren't going up and down, and because there were two elevators, and like one was going up and one wasn't. It was just like on the ground, and so this elevator mechanic from a nearby building came running in to operate the other elevator and like get that going to get people. But eventually like the mechanisms within the elevator stopped working during the fire, and so one woman, like probably many women, grabbed on to the elevator
cords.
cable and just slid down, but like butchered her hands in the process. But did live, actually. There people...
they're just trying to do anything possible to get out of the building.
Get out of the building. Yeah, it's pretty horrifying. And it's just... And this article from the New York Times is pretty powerful in that it is just story after story from eyewitness talking about all of these women falling. A student saw girls rushing to the rear factory windows, their hair on fire. They paused at the window for a moment and then jumped out. I saw 4 men, he said, who tried to catch the girls. They seized a horse blanket from a truck in Waverly Place and held it out. It gave way like paper as the girls struck it.
Oh my God.
So this is a pretty horrible event. The American Federalist in May of 1911 ran an article that said, Dr. Chase Neal, United States Commissioner of Labor, speaking of the necessity for legal compensation or death or injury by accidents, said, "This is the only country in the world where an appeal for help has to be made following an industrial disaster. All countries where there is industrial advancements, such as we enjoy, have necessary machinery to provide for the victims without an appeal to charity. The fund of $30,000 raised for the relatives of the recent factory fire in New York, where it does credit the charitable inclination of the citizens of New York, is an indictment of the maladjustment of our social system." I thought that was really powerful, coming from the Commissioner of Labor.
Right.
What a crazy, crazy challenge. The trial that follows this event is big news in New York.
I can imagine that it's heavily emotional.
The 2 bosses who fled the scene, right? Many people, workers, and the newspaper and the media alike blame these men for the fire, for not fixing the conditions that caused this sort of thing. Not fixing the safety regulations, bringing the building up to code at the time for fire, drilling the women on how to deal with fire, right? There were pails of water that were available in the corners of the room and were not utilized on the higher floors. So, high drama trial that follows. One of the big things is that the defense does a really good job. When you are super wealthy, you can hire nice lawyers. Sure. And so the defense does a good job discrediting a bunch of the witnesses. There are over 100 witnesses who give testimony in this trial, and they discredit them by convincing the jury that they had been coached and memorized the tale of the prosecutors. Which is just really annoying.
Well, and probably accurate. most witnesses that are getting up on the stand have been coached. Totally. And they should memorize what they're supposed to be
and they
saying.
They should.
It's in the court.
Right. But also 100 witnesses. There was also a technicality that the girls on the top floor did not know that the bosses did not know that the door was locked, and so how could they be responsible for something they didn't know about?
Well, okay.
So the Smithsonian said, although the justice system let the families of the workers down, widespread moral outrage increased demands for government regulation, which you saw in all these labor laws that followed. The media at the time, though, attributed the cause of the fire to the owner's negligence. And I think that's important. The media is all over these people. And that probably, the media reaction to this probably contributed to the changes that we saw. one of the stories that I think is telling of how the media responded is the story in the Literary Digest. The title of it is 147 Dead, Nobody Guilty. Like, whoa. Opinions. In this article, they said 9 months ago, 147 persons, chiefly young women and girls, were killed by a fire factory of the Triangle Waste Company at Washington Place and Green Street of New York. All of the subsequent evidence, as well as the facts of the tragedy, convinced the New York papers that this factory, where hundreds of girls were compelled by circumstance to work for their living, was a veritable fire trap. Though not worse, perhaps, than hundreds of buildings in the city. Last week, Isaac Harris and Max Blanc, owners of the factory Triangle Company, under trial for manslaughter in the first or second degree, were acquitted by a New York jury on their third ballot after being out an hour and 45 minutes. While the press and the main seem inclined to accept the verdict itself without serious challenge, many papers are gravely troubled over its practical implication that no one is responsible for the wholesale slaughter, and the feeling is widely expressed that, whatever the explanation of the outcome, justice has been in fact balked. It is one of the, quote, disheartening failures of justice which are all too common in this country, declares the New York Tribune, which goes on to say, the point of view of those who must day after day submit themselves to risk similar to those which obtained in the Triangle Factory, and thus voice in the New York call, there are no guilty, there are only the dead, and the authorities will forget the case as speedily as possible. Capital can commit no crime when it is in pursuit of profit.
I mean, them's fighting words, but that's a tragedy.
It's a tragedy.
It is an absolute tragedy to a huge number of people and families in your community, and no one's responsible.
And so I think the question that the factory owners and the newspapers and the victims' families have to grapple with is when we say, I don't think anybody disagrees on the word tragedy. But the disagreement comes from responsibility versus accident. And I think when tragedy happens, people want somebody to be responsible for it.
Oh, sure.
And this same article goes on to basically say lots of people are responsible for it. All the government employees who did not hold them to the fire codes.
Well, and this is where, like, OSHA comes in.
Yeah.
And there starts to be people who reinforce this and where they go and how they keep their rating and how often they're inspected and the surprise inspections. These things now become commonplace after this happens.
But there's so many implications for this because you also have to remember this is 1911. These women can't vote.
Nope.
The jury that oversees this case is a jury of their peers, of their male peers.
Right.
And so not only are they wrapped up in this industrial system, but they're also wrapped up in a governmental system that doesn't even recognize their full citizenship. And so for immigrant women, this also becomes a rallying cry for suffrage.
Yeah, 100%. Like, you don't care about us and you let us burn in a building.
Yeah. So this is such an important topic to teach in school, and despite the fact that there are so many primary sources available about it, there are no inquiries made by any of the major education companies. So we made one.
Nice.
And it's up on our website using some of these primary materials because it's such a rich topic and it needs to be taught well
absolutely.
in school.
Well, and the cool thing, too, is that they are still building the memorial, so they're still fundraising for that right now.
Oh, nice.
There's a placard that you can go see that documents what happened there in the location, but they're actually building a huge memorial at the foot of the building that now stands where the Triangle Factory originally stood.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
that's awesome.
donate.
Yeah, seriously.
Okay, so they can find this lesson plan on the website.
On our website.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Brooke, thank you.
I'm Brooke Sullivan.
I'm Kelsey Eckert.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts to bring more voices to the conversation. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.